All right, YouTube, this is the TradStream number 5, and my guest today is Trad Patrick of the Cath show. He had a past before of being on YouTube, apparently, with a podcast, and then had to disappear and is back with a with a very good show. And he's my guest today to talk about what it means to be a traditional Catholic, but also we're going to talk about uh, anonymity online and why you see so many Catholics on Twitter and elsewhere not showing our faces and often going by anonymous handles online because it's very necessary, despite what some higher profile figures might tell you. How are you doing today, Patrick?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I think that was a perfect introduction too.
Well, thank you. So why don't you tell us about your channel and what you do while we wait for more people to join us?
So I decided, as you said, to come back, social media, YouTube world, a couple months ago, and wanted to do similar content to what I was doing before, which was very traditional based. I know that's kind of a bad word these days, but I think people just don't understand it. So what I'm trying to do is use the format to explain what traditionalism really is, what it really means, and how a traditionalist views certain topics and certain issues in the world today. And that's what I'm basically trying to do.
Very good. I think the term traditional gets a bad rap, mostly from those who really like the new paradigm in the church and think that it has potential and that it's just been instituted incorrectly. But also by people who let's just be real, people often have bad interactions with online traditionalists because online interactions, that anonymity makes it easy for us to just, denigrate other people and not recognize, that these are our, brothers and sisters in Christ and everything else. And we become jerks. Oh yeah, you see it all the time, and not just in traditional circles, but for some reason, traditional Catholics online get smeared with it, despite the fact that I've seen actually far worse from outside the traditional spheres online. So
I agree, and I think it's also people who like to call themselves trad. Uh, I kind of shudder when I hear people call themselves trad, because it's usually like 90% of the people that call themselves trad, they're not really traditional. They're just kind of they have a very miscued idea of what traditional is, and they go out and they indulge in the modernist world every day, and then call themselves trad just because, well, I go to the TLM, so I'm trad. And I try to be like, it makes you trad in the fact that you attend a traditional mass. It doesn't make you trad though.
right, there are sometimes people will say, I want to go back to the 1950s. I'm like, well, the 1950s were already pretty degenerate. One of the things that Hollywood has been actually shockingly good at accurately portraying was just how far gone young people were already in the 1950s compared to their parents. The people, because their parents came of age during the Depression and war, and that tends to lend itself towards a natural, real conservatism, but their kids reacted very much against that stuff. And it was already evident in the 50s. So, and that was the generation that would then, bring us the wonderful decade of the 1960s, which we don't even need to talk about. So,
Yeah,
I had a friend of mine describe it once. He said, if you're traditional and you say the 50s, I'm going to be like, you mean the 1350s? Because,
that's me.
yeah, which might, and I don't think that necessarily means, we don't advocate running water or penicillin or, electricity or things like that. It's a value set, and it's, well, a kind of a rejection of the contemporary order in a lot of ways. It is an anti-modernity thing, not just a let's dial back the clock a little bit kind of worldview.
Yeah, I wrote a piece about 3 years ago, um, and uh, it was pretty widely dispersed out there. I'll have to get you a link to it, but it was about how the modern world and the problems with it actually started in the Roaring Twenties, as we call them.
That I think that was a time when Chesterton was wrote an essay that I need to find the whole essay of it because I'd love to record it and put it online. But he said that the next great degeneration in society would not be wasn't going to come from Moscow, that it would come from Manhattan. Very, very prescient of him to say that.
Yeah, especially in today's day.
Oh yeah. So those of you who might be wondering why you're seeing a wall whenever Patrick speaks, it's because we tried to change his thumbnail picture from something he didn't want on there, and it just didn't work. So that's why you get a picture of his wall. Why don't that's, I think, a good segue though to talk about, before we go back to the topic we were talking about online anonymity. If you want to tell your
Yeah.
story about how you were doxxed, that would be great. And for those of you who don't know what doxing is, why don't you start with defining the term doxing?
Sure. So about right around the beginning of the election cycle of Donald Trump, I would say probably around 2015, we started to see what was, the advent of the growing of the clash between the left and right. And one of the things that the left was really, really good at, because they have a lot of in with the tech oligarchs, is that they were doxing people, which was essentially taking their private information, their phone number, their real name, their home address, their place of business, and putting it out there. So it started with, they were going after cops and ICE agents and politicians, and then it started to trickle down to um, podcasters or anybody with a YouTube channel or with any presence on Facebook. Primarily was where this really started, was Facebook, which is why I absolutely advocate for nobody to ever have a Facebook account. But with me, it became I had a I had a Facebook following, I had a Twitter following, I had a YouTube following, and uh, I had a it was up there. I mean, I had about at the peak probably about 10,000 subscribers to the channel. I wasn't um, Molyneux or anybody like that, but I had a pretty good following, a lot of views. I was monetized at one point. Um, was really out there, and I was making a lot of statements on uh, my beliefs, which are rooted in deep Catholic social teaching. And it was, addressing everything from homosexual priests and so on. Um, but I started to address the more cultural issue and the overlying issue of homosexuality. And at the time, the issue was really like gay marriage and everything. And I said, we're really on a very slippery slope here. We allow this to become the norm, and now it's the norm. And now they say, well, we want to get married, and they say, okay, now we let them get married. They said, where does this end? So I really started to go after that really hard. But from a Catholic perspective, I never went after it of a perspective of being violent or nasty or anything like that. Just from a very uh, Catholic stance. This is why it's wrong. This is why it's not acceptable. This is how we've gotten into the problems in the church. And from there, it just led to, I got into a lot of political discussions about free market capitalism, why it's bad, um, why all these things that we see in the government today, in our nation today, like immigration and cultural diversity. And I did a piece that was on that actually was ended up going on to about like 12 or 15 different big YouTube shows about equality being a false god. Um, and that led me into having at the time a following of people that I didn't want to have, which were Wignats.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know what a Wignet is, that's the white nationalists, and we're not talking about politicians to the right of John McCain. We're talking about the people who openly are out there marching to advocating for a white ethno state. And yeah, it's an ideology that's fairly easy for people to get sucked into, and it does need to be combated from people who tend to have a more conservative worldview, because the only people combat it really are, frankly, the sort of so-called intellectual dark web, these mainstream neoconservative types, and the classical liberals, and they're combating it from the standpoint of dead ideology themselves. So I think Catholics do need to take stock of that and be wary of it, because it's a lot of people get sucked get sucked into it. But anyway, continue, Patrick.
It is a very it's a very slimy group of people. Some of them, I will say, some of them are very smart. I'm not one of these people who's automatically gonna just poo poo on everybody. Some of them are very smart people. The problem is that their ideology comes from the stance of race as being God to them. It's their religion, and so these people started following me because I was saying a lot of words that they liked to hear, not necessarily in the context that they wanted to hear it.
Right, because
And
those types of people tend to observe the same problems we do, but their solution is just as bad, honestly, if as the like off, especially as you get further into that group of people. Like there are people in that group who are obviously even public figures there who I think are redeemable, who would make pretty good traditional Catholics if you could just get them away from that materialist ideology that they have.
I agree. I mean, I got into, several debates and discussions with the likes of Jared Taylor, who I don't think is ultimately evil incarnate. I think he's misguided in a lot of things. Um, but what ended up happening, long story short, getting back onto the topic, was that um, I started to have this following of these people, and so I'm getting combated from the left, and I had these people coming into me and like kind of praising me, and so I had to start to temper back, and I started to have a lot of debates and stuff like that with these Whig Nats. They didn't like the fact that I was calling them out, calling out their ideology, not so much themselves as people. Um, so they decided that they were gonna do the first wave. So they did the first wave of doxing on me, and then the left picked up on that. That, oh well, he must be a white nationalist too. So we're gonna dox him as well. And
Of
there was a
course,
lot of
because it's a well-known tactic of white nationalists to dox other white nationalists. Because often, what happens when you dox somebody, you don't just get one person; you then get a cascading effect with people who get outed publicly.
Although as funny as that sounds, yeah, when you talk about doxing, white nationalists do absolutely dox their own people all the time. There's like so many infighting, as they like to call it, among their own. They'll be like, oh, this guy has 0.22235%, Ashkenazi Jewish in him, so we're gonna dox him. And then next week, they're on a podcast together, and it's a very, like I said, it's a very strange world, but between
Mm-hmm.
the two of them, they doxed me. They had my information out there. They did a couple of flattering videos about me. I was everything from a federal agent to I was Israeli Mossad. Um,
I
I
do.
was
I do need to address something in the chat. So right now, I'm getting a few censored chat messages. YouTube flags messages that include that involve certain words, like the name of a certain German Social Democrat Party from 1930s, or if you use what I call the S word to describe what I call the members of the Rainbow Coalition, you will it will automatically get flagged, and YouTube will often not let the message be shown. So do as I do in my videos when I mention this stuff. Try to dress it up in code or something. That way I can see your message without having to fiddle with settings, because YouTube is not a free speech platform, to put it mildly. Anyway, continue, Patrick.
So as I was saying, I was called everything from a federal agent to Israeli Mossad to I think at one point I was actually called a what was the term that they used? It was the leftists used some term for me, but basically, like I was an operative for the Republican Party.
That's to me the funniest one. I mean, I've ironically called people feds before online, but or in the comments of my own videos where somebody made a crack about, hey, when is it not a sin to commit fill in the blank illegal activity? And I was like, it's a sin, Fed, that kind of thing. But
Well, they're funny though. They tracked me. For my business, I travel a lot, and they're like, "Well, here's proof. He's always traveling. And when he travels, there's always like a military base or a police department." I'm like, "There's a a base or a police department in every city and state in this country." I'm like,
yeah,
this is really grasping, guys. But ultimately, no, I'm not a Fed. I'm not Israeli Mossad. I'm not an operative for the Republican Party. I'm a guy who I have a traditional Catholic family. I go out and I speak about traditional Catholic values. Most of the people I've become friends with, I've either had drinks with them, dinner with them. Um, you know, they see my face on when we talk privately. I'm not hiding anything. And I think that's the point of doxing, is to really just delegitimize people. It's not so much to get their information out there. It's to just delegitimize them. It's to go, you have a following, you have people listening to you, and we want to take that away from you. And how we take that away from you is to make up lies and deceit and stuff like that. And it's like, it's a very satanic thing to do. What is the devil but deceit? He's perdition. That's who he is, and that's who these people are being influenced by.
right. And so when they doxed you, what kind of information did they release to the public? Because that's actually the sort of the core of what doxing is to a release of information. So what kind of information did they put out there?
So first they went after my name, and they started looking up people on LinkedIn with my real name, and there's all kinds of bankers and businessmen and everything with my name who unfortunately were getting pulled into this whole thing. And then they finally found it. So they finally found my information. They put out my address, where I lived at the time. They put out pictures of my wife and my kids.
And when they now people, some people might think that's not that big of a deal, right? But let's I recall a story of just it was in 2015 or 2016. There was some handyman guy. He worked for either a construction company or one of those roving handyman outfits, and he had a road rage incident. And it wasn't even really, it was pretty low tier road rage. He yelled some pretty colorful things at another motorist, and that led to him getting doxxed, which led to him getting fired. And it wasn't even like on the clock in his company vehicle, and he became functionally unemployable for a long time. And people who do these things don't care about the fact that you might be the sole provider for your children. They'll just destroy your life, and it's sort of the ultimate act of the virtue signal. I went to this great length, and look what I did. I took this person down. Here's another notch on my belt. And for those of you wondering, doxing is a terms of service violation on every social media platform, but it's rarely enforced.
I think it's also very hard to enforce it in a way. But I think I'm so totally opposed to it, and I've worked with a lot of people since my incident a couple of years ago, law enforcement and whatnot. So, somebody's gonna say I'm a Fed because I did that. But uh, you know, because I've seen it, I've seen how bad it is. I don't agree with the Charlottesville people and stuff like that, but a lot of kids, like you said, they get sucked into this stuff because it's despair. Life is so terrible, and these are people who accept me. And these guys went to Charlottesville, and there's two very famous stories about two guys who got doxxed going to Charlottesville who ended up killing themselves. Um, they weren't the guys over there, fighting. They weren't the guys over there, driving a car or whatever. All these guys that
They
go to
were they were did they have the bad haircuts and the polo shirt uniform with the tiki torch, or were they there to defend statues and things?
no,
Because it seems
the
like there were multiple types of groups on that one side of the mob.
I actually streamed at the time from there, showing the thing. There were people who were there that I would say are just Confederate. I would say Confederate because I think that's even the wrong term, but the Southern Pride type of people, and they didn't want the statue to be taken down, and I think they weren't aware of what the evils of people like Richard Spencer were going to do and bring to that event. And a lot of people didn't know that they were going to have like David Duke out there and all these other people out there that ended up showing up to this event. And these poor kids who, as I said, they weren't wearing the polo shirt, they didn't have They didn't have the, Adolf haircut and the polo shirts, and weren't wearing the hoods or anything like that. They were just out there, um, you know, primarily to keep a statue from getting torn down. They get doxxed. Next thing you know, their life is ruined for the next year. And when you're in that point, you're in that point of desperation, and they kill themselves. I think that that's why it's very important, and I stress this to a lot of people. If you're going to take any type of strong stance against any issue online, to protect yourself, because it is a very, very dangerous world, the online world, and the people that live in it. And when I say live in it, I'm talking about the people who are on it, 24/7, and that's all they do. And they will find they one day they will be your best friend, your biggest fan, and the next day they are slandering you and attacking you in every post on every social media and everything else. And then the next thing you know, your private information is out there. You're getting phone calls from your businesses and all this and that. So there are a lot of people, and I won't say who they are, but there are a lot of prominent people who, they have issue with people who are anonymous. And I understand why they do. If you're going to be anonymous, be professional.
Right.
Um,
there, there are there's a certain decorum, especially if you're going to be anonymous talking about things related to the crisis in the church and trying to motivate people to expand their prayer life and things. It behooves you to operate with a certain level of decorum, and it's easy to fall away from that on Twitter and other places. And it's why I don't bring any drama from other places to my channel, because if I'm going to be, I'm not even anonymous. I tell people my name. I have a PO box address in the description of my videos. But at the end of the day, if you're going to be doing anything on behalf of the church, even as a layperson, or especially as a layperson, it behooves you to act as if, to be, as to the best of your ability, Christ-like when you're doing it. And I'm not very good at that, but
I
still,
don't think I don't think any
it's
of
a
us are. I think we try, but we never get there. I think it's just, like I said, I understand these guys. It's be professional. Don't be confrontational. And I think then even those guys would say, okay, I understand why. Some people are like, oh well, I make, you know, I make $40,000 a month online. You can do it too. Not everybody can do it. It's not as simple as that. And I think that that's what they don't understand. I have a business. I have a large family. I have people that work for me and all this and that I have to think about them. And so at one point again, and I put my face out there, I put my name out there, and I said, you know what? I'm not being nasty. I'm not being mean. I'm not out here larping around and talking about insane, ridiculous things. I'm talking about just things that to me made a lot of sense. Like free markets. Uh, I don't agree with it.
and
Immigration. I
and
don't agree with it.
that's not an endorsement of socialism either.
No.
There's a dichotomy that was pushed on us by, I think, American mainline conservatives. One of the very few things they've ever been successful in doing, and that's in forcing us to believe in the political dichotomy and the economic dichotomy. This idea that there's either left or right, and all the ideas that flow into those two groups. It was one of the biggest con jobs ever pushed on us. And there were figures who were different kinds of conservatives in this country who got utterly marginalized and destroyed when that happened. And I'm thinking of guys like Pat Buchanan, and there are others who have historically just been thrown, into the wayside because they didn't fit perfectly into the fake left or the fake right wing not conspiracy, but fake left or fake right wing dichotomy.
Absolutely. I mean, I think Pat Buchanan, Paul Gottfried, Kirk Russell back in the day. A lot of those guys were really the main ones to speak um, about the things that I think that guys like you and me really try to express as best we can. I don't think I can ever express it the way um, Pat Buchanan can, but I try.
Yeah, it's 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 difficult. But I think that covers doxing. I mean, the other than that, the effect it had on you. What was the effect it had on you? Like, what did it force you to do, basically?
Well, I think from a business perspective, it didn't have that much because, as I said, I'm secure there. It did cause us. We had to change some phone numbers and stuff like that because we were just getting ridiculous. I mean, I would love to tell you some of the glorious things that they would like to say to people who answered the phone, but
It's a
uh,
family friendly show.
just a family friendly show here. Um, we had to change the phone numbers. We had to move. A lot of people don't realize that, um, when this happens, you have to move. You have to leave. And a lot of people have left. A lot of people have moved. People I knew in the world of podcasting from a right wing perspective, Faith Goldie, Gavin McInnes. I mean, a lot of these people I don't agree with. Um, I don't agree with Gavin on most things, but I do agree with him about dancing and its effects and all that and what it does. You have to move. You have to you know make sure you take down old pictures of your family from online. You have to make sure you change everything that you are, and you have to disappear from it for a while. I think that's what a lot of people don't realize. You have to disappear from it for a while. You have to scrub your digital fingerprint, if you would, and just leave for a while. And
Right, and it's hard because I don't want to be anonymous, but at the same time, all that violent activity you see on the news coming from a certain political section of our the political realm in this country, the street violence you're seeing in cities, that's not just mass action. There have been occasions where people would camp out outside of people's homes and threaten violence. So I mean,
mhm.
these people are crazy, and so it's a risk. It's more of a risk than certain online, more higher profile figures in the traditional Catholic realm would have you believe. But let's move on from the doxing topic because I don't want to also give people the impression that that their lives are in constant danger either. It's just it can happen to people, and it does happen to people, and so people should take a certain amount of precautions and give those of us who choose to have a silly online handle, a bit of a break. Um, anyway, so again, let's return to the topic though of the traditional Catholic, what it means to be a traditional Catholic, because there are people, like I said earlier, who just want to get back to pre 1962 or 1965 or whatever year it was that they think the culture went off the rails. When it takes a long time for a culture to go off the rails, the 60s didn't come out of nowhere. The seeds for that were planted decades, if before that, if not even earlier. And in fact, I frankly think that most of the reason that our culture is the way it is today is because of the Reformation. That if you follow the logic of the ideas of the Reformation, you can see a clear line of degeneracy from that point onward. You don't get a Voltaire without Martin Luther, and you don't get Karl Marx without a Voltaire. I mean, and you don't get the crazy stuff today without all of those figures.
I like to, when I used to write about it, I used to say that there's three times in history that we have to look at as being really the most detrimental to Western civilization: the Reformation, the Enlightenment, and the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
These are three of the times that have been the most detrimental to Western civilization, hands down, bar none. We could talk about the Dark Ages, which weren't dark. We don't have to go into that. They were actually some of the
There,
best times.
yeah,
Um, the Middle Ages, these were all good times. But when we come into the time of the Reformation, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, we start to see people really starting to put themselves in the role of their own God. Let's just say, they're the masters of their own destiny, if you would. And so I agree with you. We don't get the modern society that we have today overnight. This didn't happen in a lot of people like to go. I argue with people all the time. They go, "Oh, this is because of Obama," and I go, "No, it's not." It's, everything it goes back. We're talking. If we're talking about America primarily, we got to start with Wilson. And a lot of people don't look at it from that perspective. And a lot, even in the church, you hear people, like you said, they want to point to the '60s as being the era that changed everything. And I go, well, but you wouldn't have the '60s if you didn't have the Roaring '20s. When
The
you
only thing,
had
yeah, the only thing, the reason that the Roaring Twenties didn't have the cultural impact that the '60s did was because of the Depression. That is
that's it.
literally the Depression and the war. That was it. That's the reason.
But you look at the '20s, and what do you have? You have burlesque. You have a very decadent. I mean, I'd even go further back. You go back to the Victorian era. I mean, this is where really, when you look at the Victorian era, this is where you're really starting with smut. People don't realize that. I say to people all the time, where do you think porn came from? It was born out of the Victorian era. The Victorians were very, I don't want to say deviant, but they were very open about sexuality and all that. And that's where I think really that whole thing starts. And then you get into the '20s and you have burlesque, and you start to have all these peep shows and everything else, and that's where these things started out. And then
I mean,
it just deteriorates from there.
I mean, if you've listened to any of like E. Michael Jones talks about the how the culture sort of got to the state that it's in, he talks about the production code in Hollywood, and that got started in like the '30s. And there's a reason for that, because there's plenty of evidence that you can find online. If not, I don't recommend doing it, because you're going to have immediately be seeing pornographic stuff if you do. But there's a lot, like Hollywood was really bad, really bad in the '20s and '30s. You didn't nudity in Hollywood films didn't get started, with Jane Mansfield and The Pawnbroker and other films in the '60s. That stuff was going on in like the teens and the '20s, and it was Catholics and to a lesser degree evangelicals who stood up and said no to Hollywood and put the production code and forced the production code to get put in place so that movies would come out and not be an immediate threat to your family, even though they were still pushing some subversive values more subtly. But they couldn't, make fun of clergy in the films. They couldn't have, make the movies pornographic. Game of Thrones would be inconceivable, during the production code. So, and this is an ongoing battle that I have with people, because I enjoy, a good movie, even sometimes in a contemporary film aimed at adult. And I don't mean adults in the negative sense, but adults in the, an older audience. But man, once you wake up to this stuff, you go, I can't watch this stuff, or I can't watch it for long, otherwise I'm gonna lose my soul, because I can't think of a movie that came out in the last few years that was actually, promoted traditional values, or at least didn't attack traditional values, that wasn't
I
made
think
by a Christian film company.
I think that's part of the problem, though, is like Christian. I mean, I'm just gonna be like really blunt here. It's like Christian rock, Christian music, Christian fiction are just really, really bad. Um, they're not good, and so especially younger people are like, I don't know, this is horrible. I'd rather watch Thor Ragnarok or whatever. And I think when I decided, and my family decided, that we wanted to be traditionalists in every sense. One of the first things that we looked at was, what are we watching on TV? What are we consuming? What is it that we are, we're not necessarily eating when we're watching TV or movies, but we are nurturing our body, because we're feeding our brain. And it was like that was the first thing where it was like, there's nothing on TV that I really see as being uh, helpful to gaining an enlightened uh, psyche or anything like that, or being in touch with God, or my family. And so that was one of the first things that just kind of went. It just was like, I don't watch TV. People talk about movies all the time, and occasionally I'll be like, yeah, I'll still, like you said, I'll still enjoy, a good shoot 'em up. The other day I was watching John Wick. I'm like, it's a great movie. John Wick's a great movie. Why? There's absolutely no social justice teaching in it at all. It's just the guy who's going out and he's shooting all the bad guys at the end. You know?
Didn't they kill his dog or something in that first film, and that's what just caused him to go off the deep end?
Yeah, here's a guy who's just after revenge because they killed his dog and stole his car.
Deep
You know,
plot. It's a
so
pop,
that's
but it's an '80s style popcorn movie with
it is.
modern
It
special
is.
effects.
it's just sit there and watch it, zone out, enjoy yourself, type of movie. And I really, really wish that there was more entertainment like that today, because it's just like that's what entertainment is supposed to be. Entertainment is supposed to give you a break from reality for a little bit and take you
Right.
away. It's not supposed to be preachy. It's not supposed to tell you about feminism. It's not supposed to, tell you how you're a white male Catholic and you're bad. It's just supposed to be good. I go back and I look at old movies that I like to watch, and that's what they're about. It's just something like I love Trading Places. Every year, to me and my family, that's a Christmas movie. I don't know
Is
why.
that the Eddie Murphy, Dan Aykroyd one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie. And then there's the more edgy movie that takes place in the same universe, Coming to America, which has a little bit of nudity in it. But then again, so does Trading Places. I think if I'm remembering it correctly,
It's
but
like it's one brief scene. There's one brief scene which
which you can
we
honestly get
edited
if
out.
you can honestly just skip forward 3 seconds and it's gone or whatever. But yeah, the Hollywood, and a lot of people don't get this. Hollywood knows that they will by pushing this agenda, they're not going to lose that much money because like Disney, which owns most of the sort of the science fiction fantasy films that make $1 billion right now, even if you don't go see it and the movie, like say the new Star Wars movie, doesn't make as much money as it's projected, it's still making a ton of money.
Hmm.
And they know that like they can put out some truly awful, cape movie like Captain Marvel, and it'll still make $1 billion. So it doesn't really matter that much.
No, it doesn't. And I think it brings us to the greater point. Like when people say to me, about traditionalism, and they say it's like I look at everything, and you look like we just said about modern society and entertainment and all that. That is modern society. That is, if you put all that together and you put it in a box and you put some pretty paper on it and said modernism, that's what it is. It's all there in that box. Where I'm a traditionalist, it's not just because I'm a traditionalist because I go to a TLM mass or an extraordinary form mass or anything like that. It's because once I'm outside of the church, I'm still living that life. We do family rosary with 6 kids every night. And let me tell you, if you don't have 6 kids, trying to do family rosary at the same time every night is in and of itself a part-time job.
Oh, I know.
Um,
Like last night, my wife and I did our rosary, and our 9 month old, who is very mobile, was holding his baby rosary in his teeth while crawling around, and it was like, yeah, it'd be nice to be able to focus on the mysteries, but got to make sure the kid doesn't fly off the couch or whatever.
you do, and I mean, but that's see, like that is the best thing in the world, though. Is like to me that says traditionalism. Your wife, your kid, with the big giant bead, children's rosary, which we have a couple of. It's that. It's going outside and picking fruits and vegetables as a family. We don't go when we go out as a family. We don't go to all these like amusement parks and stuff like that. We go to other farms, and on those other farms we'll pick stuff that we don't have on our property. So we may be picking peaches because we don't have peaches, or we may, this is something that my kids have grown up to enjoy. We come home and the kitchen looks like a nuclear bomb exploded because we have to can all this stuff and then get it into, we go hunting.
By the way, I want to
we,
pick up a traditional, what we would call a trad hobby slash survival skill. Maybe you can help me out with this in the future. I want to learn how to pickle. I'm
oh,
tired of
absolutely.
nasty pickles from the grocery store when I know that with a little bit of an investment, I could make a year supply of pickles for not much money. So,
Definitely. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm going to be doing on the show is talking a lot more about some of the things that we do. I mean, there's farms here where you can go in and the guy's like, yeah, 50 cents, $1 a pound, whatever, you're picking up pickling cucumbers. You come home, you realize you spent $30 and you have 65 pounds of cucumbers to get to pickle.
and
Um,
and that's enough to make enough pickles that a year later you're giving them away.
yes,
you know, and
we,
they're
we,
I watched a video done by some group. my wife's YouTube tastes are a bit different than mine, and sometimes they run into the you know which food is actually better blind taste test stuff, harmless kind of brain candy stuff. And there was one where this person was testing pickles, and it just made me want expensive pickles. Like, that's all I really wanted. And I'm like, well, if I want expensive pickles, I'm going to make them myself, because not only should everybody be able to know how to grow their own food in case you find yourself in a situation where you have to, but also how to preserve your own food if you need to. It doesn't
Well, I
help you
think,
if you grow like 5 acres of green beans to all of a sudden be, having a whole bunch of green beans rotting because you harvested your green beans and now you're dying.
and I think that goes back to, again, the thing that I love more than anything, which is Catholic social teaching. I mean, it tells you, to be in touch with your food, uh, to know that, what you're eating is, something that somebody grew or you grew, and you took from, this stage to this stage to this stage to final consumption. And then you start to appreciate your food. And I think that's another thing that I've spoken about in depth as a traditionalist, is the reason people in America are so unhealthy. And it's not just America. I traveled to Europe a lot. So let me just take that back. People in Western civilization today are so unhealthy is because they don't have any connection at all with food. To them, food is something you go to the local mega mart, you fill up a cart, you bring it in your car, you go, you cook it, but they don't think about, hey, let me look at what's on this label, what's actually in this can of beans, what's in this, whatever it is. And so now, you jump forward to the last 10 years, the big thing is organic. Everybody's saying organic, organic, organic. But a lot of people don't realize that organic is only a term that is used in order to get a license from the federal government. It does not mean that that stuff is grown with absolutely no pesticides, absolutely this, absolutely that. No, there are levels of restrictions that they have to follow to get an organic label. It doesn't necessarily mean what you think it does, in which case that's why organic food, in most cases, is more expensive than regular food.
Right. And
So,
I'm very familiar with all of this because before I converted, I was working on studying sustainable development. So you can't study sustainable development without crossing into at least food and agriculture policy. And you brush into the organic stuff pretty easily when you're doing that. And honestly, the most of the organic stuff is just a gimmick. It really is, unless you're growing it yourself and making it truly organic, and finding natural ways of keeping the aphids off of your off your broccoli plants and such. Which, anybody knows how to do that, let me know. I lost all my broccoli plants this year. So,
we lost a couple of our cabbages because it was like they
I think it
started
was
to get
cabbages. I think it was my
oh,
cabbage plants actually.
yeah, we lost a couple too because it was like all of a sudden they started getting bugs, and I'm like, so it was like I went out to the local Lowe's and I keep reading behind all this stuff and saying, okay, this has too much. I'm not gonna. And finally found one that was, it was built with plants and bugs and stuff like that. That keeps bugs off and everything like that. And when I looked at the price, it was like this one spray bottle. It was like $20, but all this other stuff with all the chemicals and stuff was, of course, like $2-3. But again, that's the price of traditionalism, and I think a lot of people just don't realize that. It's like, what are the things that a traditionalist decides? We decided, when we were having kids, that we were going to be a one income family. In the beginning, that was the hardest thing in the world to do. We had 3 kids in rapid fire, like pretty much, within less than a year of each other, and we were barely making ends meet. But how do you do that? Hand me downs. I tell people all the time, hand me downs are great. Until the kid's 12, they're going to outgrow it in a couple days anyway. Nobody cares. Cheap sneakers from Walmart. Who cares? We decided we were going to homeschool. We said, we're not going to put our kids in the public education system, because it goes against everything that we stand for. And I tell people that being a traditionalist is a lot like being an Amish. That's the best way I can really describe it. It's Amish, but for Catholics.
Right.
Um,
Like, you're
where
not
Amish,
you're not eschewing technology per se is like the
right?
main difference. It's but a lot of people get taken aback when they come into your living room and don't see a TV taking up like the place of honor,
Mm-hmm.
where
Well,
maybe
people
a
come.
where maybe a bookshelf or a side altar or just another couch should be.
Well, people come in my house and they see this giant altar, I have a giant altar. I have a lot of stuff. As you know, I was before I had my family, I was on my way to becoming a priest. I'm a cradle Catholic. I have all this stuff handed down from my grandparents and my parents. So we have just a overflowing. A lot of people come into my house and they're like, wow, like everywhere there's icons and everything. And it's funny because a lot of people who don't know me will right away ask if we're Mexican. Um,
Yeah, I love that, like Walmart and the couple of the grocery stores in my neighborhood will sell the candles, with the saints on them, where it's
mhm.
English one side, Spanish on the other, and it's always on the Mexican food aisle. I'm
Yep.
just like, I'm like, okay, I've got a few of those in my house. I would. Do you know where I can get a line on kneelers? By the way, the one person kneeler, like the kind you see at a Catholic wedding. The priest will bring them up the kneelers to the center aisle, so
Mhm.
that as soon as you're married, you and your wife can receive the Lord as a married couple for the first time before everybody else receives the Eucharist. You know where you
I
get?
found,
Hmm?
I found the best place to find things like that is actually Etsy,
Oh,
because the thing I like about Etsy is from my standpoint as a traditionalist is that it's an individual person having their own individual storefront. You look at Veils by Lily. Veils by Lily is a great place for women to buy veils. Started out on Etsy. It's not Amazon. You're not supporting the evil genius from the Austin Powers movies. Um, you're out there actually making a connection with somebody who makes this stuff in their house. At their dining room table.
yeah. I bought my wife and I's brown scapulars through an Etsy store.
Yeah, it's definitely probably one of the best. The other thing that I would say is my son and I made a kneeler. It wasn't easy. I won't, I'm not going to be one of these people who's like on these, instructable videos going, oh, this is really simple. You can do it in 3 hours. Um, it, it took a lot. We threw out the first three that we tried to make, because they were just terrible. But, if you really want to, again, get that connection to something, I say, there's some pretty good instructional videos out there on how to make a kneeler. Um, and if you just have like a basic understanding of hand tools and stuff like that, it can be done. I mean, I like to build something all the time because it gives me that connection to Saint Joseph.
Mm.
Um,
I
it
don't have
really,
this. I don't have the skills to do that, unfortunately.
I
Part of
didn't either.
my part of my childhood involved the father figure in my life actively keeping me away from tools and things at that formative age. It's one of my it's one of those things that I try not to be, hold a grudge about. you know.
I wasn't good with it either, to be honest with you. I self-taught. To be honest with you, I self-taught myself a lot of it, just out of necessity, because when I first came out of active duty in the military, I couldn't find a job, and I got these laborer jobs, and I had never done this kind of stuff before in my life, and I just had to self-teach myself all of this stuff. But it does. I try to get the connection with the saints in trying to do what they did. We try to cook the meals that the saints would eat. Again, that to me says traditional. If you want to say you're a traditionalist, it's hard to live that life. But even if you try and you only do 10 or 15% of it, and when I say 10 or 15%, I mean 10 or 15% on top of going to a traditional mass. Do a few things that are more traditional in life. Maybe instead of watching, 5 hours of TV a night, drop it down to two, and read some of the books. Some of the things that I it kind of gets on my nerves, and I try to talk about it in a very nice way, and not be judgmental. Is people who are like, I'm Catholic, I go to a traditional Latin mass. Okay, great. Have you read? No, I don't read. Uh, what about Audible? You can listen. No, I just don't like books. There's so much out there
Oh,
about our faith.
I know this because I know this from my own experience in one way. I'll put up a papal encyclical that's not even very long, or a homily or an essay from an interesting Catholic writer from the last century and a half, and they're my least watched videos.
Yeah, literally is.
I don't judge people for it, but
No,
it's just humorous to me
it's
because like
it's not judgmental.
the figures who were formative in my becoming a Catholic were um, Fulton Sheen and Chesterton and a few other like people who've been deceased for a long time, whose heyday is long since past. And but and I get it. I mean, papal encyclicals can be pretty dense things. They're not the most enjoyable things to read. Says the guy who recorded one on organized labor and put it up this morning, or put it up this morning. But
Very good, by the way.
yeah, I was surprised. I only found out that Pius X wrote about labor just in the last couple of weeks. And for anybody who has an innate hostility to organized labor, you might actually find what he has to say about labor interesting, because it's today the labor unions of today are not exactly what the Catholic Church has historically supported, because the principal goal of the labor union, according to them, is not only to ensure that you get a family wage, but to also make sure you keep your soul in the workplace. And so when your labor union is advocating for policies that are anti-family or supporting politicians who believe in supporting the Moloch agenda, well, that's not in keeping with Catholic social teaching on the issue of labor unions in the slightest. And he says as much in that encyclical. It's not even a very long one either.
No, it's a pretty short one, but it was. I'm glad you did that video, because I think a lot of people. I think a lot of people are more inclined to kind of listen to somebody talk about it and then read it, than they are to sit down and do it themselves. But I think that's the thing that's missing, and I think a lot of people also glance over a lot of the more traditional people that are in the Catholic world today. So you look at like Joseph Pierce. A lot of people don't know who Joseph Pierce is, which is a travesty in
Oh, I
my
know,
mind.
especially since he's the favorite sort of target of people who don't like his perspective on things, and that's a lot of people out there. But
Oh yeah.
I like my favorite contemporary Catholic writers. Like I've got something by Joseph Pierce on my bookshelf. I like him, and I like Anthony Esselin for talking about Catholic social
Hmm.
teaching in the contemporary world, because they don't like, if you go look up Catholic social teaching, you'll find a lot of parish websites that give you a very weirdly slanted modernist take on Catholic social teaching, and it always lines up with like political agendas, and it just drives me nuts when I see that stuff.
It does.
Subsidiarity means fill in the blank hot button issue of the day. It's like bang my head against my desk when I see that.
It does, and it's a shame that a lot of these guys get glossed over, because they're not as, I would say they're not as flashy as some of these other guys. They don't have you know t-shirt sales and whatever else. If anybody is out there who's a Catholic that is really into classic literature, you have to know Joseph Pierce. If you're out there and you're a Catholic and you're really involved in politics, you have to know Mike Church. If you're really out there and you're a Catholic and you're into monarchianism, or the history of the monarchs, you have to know Charles Column. These are
Yeah,
just people.
these are the kings.
They
Uh,
are.
like seriously, like Charles Colom's. If you're not familiar with Charles Colomb, especially, and you want to get to know him, just go find the Tumblr House YouTube channel. He has a podcast that comes up with another person who works for his publishing company that he grew up with, actually, or that his co-host grew up with him, actually, which is interesting. And they put a podcast up 2 to 3 times a month, and it's free. It's an hour long, maybe a little longer, and it's probably my favorite podcast right now, the Tumblr House podcast.
Yeah,
And
it's
and Colomb just wrote it just finished his book on Blessed Karl, the last I believe the last emperor of the Habsburg Empire, who's on his way to
yes,
canonization, which is why he wrote his book.
it's awesome. I think we're seeing like the best time for people who are becoming saints. I mean, Blessed Carl, Fulton Sheen is well on his way. He's just been beautified by the church.
Cardinal
He's
Newman.
been Cardinal Newman. We're definitely seeing some a resurrection. I'd say we're seeing a resurrection in the church like we've never seen before. And I've been trying to preach this a little bit to people in the last couple of days, and I think you know about it. Is from a traditional standpoint, bad things happened in the church. Yes, It's not the first time bad things have happened in the church. Be honest with ourselves. Um, the things that have happened in the church happen in greater numbers in any public school in the United States of America. Um, we're hyper focused on the black pill of every day of all the bad things that happen in the church, when that's, these people, the clergy, are not they're not the church, and our Lord and Savior Christ, Jesus Christ Himself, said this. You know, and the church has been through bad things before, and it's come out on the winning side of it. It's 2,000 plus years. There's always going to be something. We have to admit what the real problem is. Once we admit what the real problem is, which is communist infiltration into the church, then we can look at it and go, okay, how do we root out the communists, the Freemasons, the liberals, the progressives that have infiltrated the church in the last 100 years?
And the best way to do that is to pursue sanctity, stay close to the sacraments,
Yep.
become knowledgeable about what the church actually teaches. And if you know a young man who's on his way to seminary, support him. Like, even if that means just keeping him in your prayers and being nice to him when he shows up on breaks and listening to him and watching for signs of trouble at a seminary. Just be there for the guy, because the younger crowd is of seminarians that are coming out are much more in keeping with the types of people we want to see in the priesthood. Given
They
time,
really
this issue may clear itself up, but there's also the gatekeeping done by the existing priests and the existing, the directors of the seminaries, and the gatekeeping done by the bishops and things. So these guys need your support, and that, yeah, I mean, those are just a couple ways I can think of on the top of my head. It's also like there's this constant black pilling thing. It's weird for me because I talk a lot about bad news, but I try to do a good news video at least once or twice a month now, because we can't constantly be doing negative stuff. And that's why I'm glad this podcast has been mostly positive, other than the doxing story that we talked about at the beginning. And for those of you joining us late, go ahead and watch the beginning of this again later, because Patrick talks about his experience having very bad people expose most of the intimate details of his family life. And I mean, like, intimate details, I mean, like, addresses and pictures of family members for
Yeah,
for speaking common sense, basically what used to be called common sense.
I try to speak. I try to speak from a positive standpoint. I mean, I do talk about, I do talk about modernism. I do talk about degenerate society on my show. I do talk about, my aversion to, as a traditionalist. Let's just say, as a traditionalist, yes, I consider myself a distributist. I know a lot of people hate that term. I don't like the term myself, but it is the term that
There are
has
some
been
things that
used.
I would, if I had a time machine, there are some things I would do. And one of them would be to find Chesterton and Belloc sitting in a pub with Father Vincent McNabb while they're writing their early works, and be like, guys, that name sucks. Like, and guys, stop using terms like proletariat and means of production, because there are people who are going to paint you as socialists in the future, even though you're not. So please don't do that.
I think a lot of people don't know the history of Belloc, because Belloc, I think he used a lot of terms that he knew when he was more of a left leaning person, and he knew the terms. And then as he progressed, a lot of people don't know his progression, but he went from being kind of a socialist to being a conservative to being just a Catholic.
Right.
So he kind of went through all of it. But as I said, I don't like the term. I agree with you. I think the term is awful. But it does encompass my beliefs as a traditionalist. Where we should be. I'm not an anarchist. I'm not a socialist. I despise socialism as much as I despise communism. And I go a step further in the fact that I despise liberalism in all its forms. You can call it classical liberalism, you can call it libertarianism. I look at all of those and say, yeah, well, the word liberal's in all of them.
And it's at the root of it. I mean, the godfathers of all those ideologies you just named were Hobbes and Locke.
Mm-hmm. And then,
And yeah, and it's all radical individualism through a materialistic lens,
yep.
meaning the individual is the primacy. And it's a fruit of the Reformation. It's not a coincidence that Hobbes and Locke showed up less than a century after the ravages wrought um, by Martin Luther and Calvin and Henry VIII. In fact, they're the logical fruits of the 30 Years' War and everything else. And that's it. People don't like hearing that, but most conservatism in the United States isn't really conservative. It's liberalism, and it's why some of us, if you pay attention on social media, you'll start seeing whenever the GOP surrender on a hot button social issue, people start tweeting things like the conservative case for whatever gross thing that progressives are pushing today, because it'll be a year from now or 5 years from now that the GOP will be tripping over themselves to say how much for this gross thing they are and how the other side really isn't for this gross thing. It,
That's
it,
how
it You'll
that's
go
how I
for it.
look at conservatism. I look at conservatism today, and I think you and I have said this. Both of us have said this: is that conservatism today is really just it's libertarianism with a free market tinge. There's no, when you look at Russell and all these people back in the day, Buchanan and Gottfried and all these other people, I would even say, uh, what was his name? Now I can't remember his name. Buchanan was on with them all the time. But anyway, those original conservatives, they were deeply rooted in, most of them were Catholic. Um, they were deeply rooted in social issues. Nowadays, you hear all these conservatives go, I'm a fiscal conservative, but a social liberal. And I go, that doesn't even make a little bit of sense. So, so
I
I
mean,
just
what
get
they
it.
what it, it's I'm trying to remember how somebody, a secular commentator I listened to once, described it. They said that libertarians were, oh gosh, what are they? They were Republicans who like weed and fornication.
Yeah, basically that's what it is. I mean, it's the turning point crowd, right?
Yeah.
It's the turning point crowd. It's like I love Trump, and I'm gonna say this, and I get a lot of flack from especially the younger guys when I say I like Trump. I like Trump. I hate his foreign policy. His foreign policy is terrible. Um,
Do not
I
approve
just
of his personal life, his
I
personal
do
past.
right. I don't approve of the fornication and all that stuff, but I do agree with a lot of things. He has been trying to do things. He's been getting them through, but I disagree with him on social issues. Um, the United States now is an interventionist on trying to push, homosexual laws. Like this is because it's been such um, a great thing for America. It's like, okay, I disagree with that. So people ask me all the time, they say, what are you? If you're not a conservative, you're not a liberal. I say, well, first, I'm a Catholic. Uh, Second, I'm a Catholic. And then third, I'm a traditionalist. And so when I vote, when I look at policy, when I look at everything, I look at through those three lenses: Catholic, Catholic, traditional. And that's how I basically like the box that says modernist up there on the shelf. The box that says traditionalist. The problem with the box that says traditionalist is it's very big because there's so many different definitions of it. And ultimately, I think what people have to realize is that the only true definition of a traditionalist is somebody who lives a life as much as they can according to Catholic social teaching. And if you can live your life as much as you can according to Catholic social teaching, you will never go wrong. You will never be unhappy. You will never go for wanting of anything. And ultimately, even like things like I went through with doxing, it's
It,
this too shall pass, and it
it's
does.
just a temporary cross you have to carry.
And I look at it like this: no matter what happens to me in my life, no matter what happens to me in my life, the pain that I suffer will never be as great as the pain that was suffered by our Lord and Savior to give us this life,
Hmm.
to give us this path. And so I do welcome the suffering a little bit. Like I did grow up in Opus Dei home. We do believe that you have to suffer a little bit to understand, to connect, and so I think a lot of people look at suffering in any way, whether it's a sickness or a temporary money issue or whatever, and it's just like they it's just like the worst thing in the world that can happen to them. And we look at it in my home, when we have a whole bunch of cabbage that just gets ruined that we spent hours and days cultivating and everything like that, and we go, oh well, we still have six more. you know um and it's hard to get there. It is, it's
Mhm.
very hard. But but I think that's, I think that's the life we're meant to live, and that's what I look at as traditionalism, and that's what I look at. Like I said, there's so many great people out there that people I don't think are following enough, and I think people probably get sick of it when they look at my Twitter and I keep posting, Charles Colomb or the Crusade Channel or somebody else, and because I just get tired of seeing the same three or four people that people are listening to. And there are so many other people that are out there that they may, at first you may not like how they talk, or you may not like the cadence that they have. But after you start to listen to them, you will learn things that you won't learn from some of these other more mainstream um, speakers out there.
Mhm. I think
That includes
traditional.
you.
I think. Well, thanks. I think traditionalism is a also a sort of a more of a life of voluntary simplicity. One of the things that has wrecked modern, the modern culture is this crazy amount of just complexity that we take on voluntarily. Can you imagine if someone had told you in the early '90s that you would voluntarily take up a phone bill that would cost you $100 or more a month so you can insult people on the internet and play video games at a moment's notice and look at pornography while at work? You would have thought they were crazy, right? But those are the things that people use it for. They don't use it. They don't use their smartphone for anything really important. And how many phone calls do most people make in a day? Not
You
many.
know, that's the thing that gets me is I always see everybody, no matter where I'm at, whether I'm in London, Rome, New York City, whatever it is, I always see people, and what are they doing? They're tick tick ticking, right? That's what my wife calls it, tick tick ticking. They're texting, they're tweeting, they're Facebooking, but they aren't talking on the phone. And I think that's the thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that's more of the issue. A lot of people like to think that they like to use the term materialism, and I think a lot of people don't even understand what that term means either, because you do have to make money, you do have to have things, but like you said, when you said it's simplicity. What do I absolutely need, and what is just kind of all right? This is a little bit of a luxury. Um, I have a little bit extra. I've given money to the church. I've given money here. I have a little bit extra. I'm going to spoil myself and buy, whatever this is. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing, and I don't think that even the church looks at it in that sense. Um, I think that what the church does look at is things like you just said. Why are you going to be on that phone all day? I try my hardest, at least a couple hours a day, to put the phone, you know, either leave it in my office at work and go out and do something, or if I'm at home, I leave it upstairs in the bedroom, and then go and do something else. Just so I'm away from it for a little bit, just so that I kind of get my connection and my peace and everything like that. And you know, the first thing everybody says is pray the rosary, which is absolutely true. Pray the rosary. You should do it at least once a day, all 5 decades. But I think people forget that praying the rosary is not the end. You should also pray.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It can be
I
a
do the
quick. It can be a quick prayer while you're walking down the street, and you see somebody in need, and you see every person that you walk past is in need. And it's not just, not to denigrate like the homeless person. Obviously, the person is in need, and you should help them if you can. But you know, I always used to pray when I was, had come into the church and was had lived an agnostic life and had become Catholic, battle for custody of the eyes and the mind kind of thing. I'd see an
Mhm.
immodestly dressed person that would be, tempt me to like look in a way that I shouldn't. And I would say a quick prayer for them and myself because you cannot be judging, be trying to avoid going from, it's easy to slip into the judgmental mindset too with these kind of things. Like praying for other people in a judgmental way, it's probably one of the most toxic things you can do for your spiritual health.
Oh, I'm probably one of the worst about that. I'll be honest with you. I'm probably that's one thing I can never talk about because I can talk about it from the perspective that I'm terrible at it because I look at things and I'm definitely judgmental on a lot of things because I look at it from a cradle Catholic's perspective and I go, come on, You really let your daughter walk around, at 10 years old with a pair of pants on and say juicy on the butt? I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm going to think you're an idiot. I'm sorry. And I'll go home and I'll pray for myself, but I honestly, I don't know if I could pray for a person like that, because I just get to the point where it's like, this person is really not that bright. You're letting your 10-year-old daughter wear juicy on her butt, but then you're the same person who's going to go home and talk about how women are objectified. I mean, no.
It's why I say that I think most of us are modernists to some degree. It's been a hypothesis of mine. I've wanted to do a video on it, but I don't know how to really talk about it other than to say most of us have imbibed of modernism to some degree, and we
Oh
cling
yeah.
to some facets of modernism. And I don't mean superficial things like the internet. That might sound like, but the internet is a tool, and that makes it more superficial than, say, ideas that run contrary to the faith that are being taught widely. One of the things that always makes me cringe is when I see people celebrating figures like Karl Rahner or Desjardins or these other people who were loved by the modernist fathers. And man, looks like we have a super chat. And just the person, it's from Leon Ham, who says, God bless you both and all those tuned into your conversation. Well, thank you very much. We do appreciate the super chat, and also we do appreciate the well wish, and God bless you and your family as well.
Yes. I, I love to hear people who say, when I talk to people and they go, especially on Twitter, and I think, Twitter can be a hive. What was it in Star Wars where he said the most wretched hive of scum and villainy?
That's my go to line from Star Wars to describe a place that I don't like.
That's like, Twitter can
When
be
people say,
that.
why don't you want people like, why don't you want to go back to your hometown? I'm like, there, you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
I live too close to your hometown, so trust me, I know.
And for
I
I'm not going to beat around the bush. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon, and if you don't know why that place is a wretched hive of scum and villainy, you're blessed. I'll say that much. It means you haven't been exposed to things. I went back for Christmas last year. For the longtime subscribers, they know that I went from posting daily to I had like 4 or 5 videos that were pre-scheduled to go up so that I saw the channel active. And I got off the plane and I'm sitting, in my in-laws' vehicle as we're driving from the airport to their house, and I just feel my anxiety levels ticking up and up and up and up and up. And it was like I didn't even want to leave their house the whole time.
Yeah, it's
So
pretty bad.
when I moved to Central Oklahoma, most of the time when you move away from home, far away to a place where you don't know a single person, and you're doing it for work to start a new job, most of the time you have anxiety. My anxiety dropped through the floor, and I noticed it 48 hours later. That's when I knew there were issues.
I live in the Pacific Northwest myself. I live in Idaho though, but I have to go to Seattle and Portland all the time, and it's like there's like these three cities. You got Boise, Portland, Seattle, that make up the major cities of the Pacific Northwest, and it's like two of the three are like just Sodom
They're
and
little.
Gomorrah.
Yeah. Sodom and Gomorrah is a good way to describe it, or Little Babylon.
Yeah, it's pretty bad, but no, I love hearing people like, on Twitter who say, hey, and something you said really sparked it, and then you have like this long thread, going back and forth of helping people and talking. And I think that's the good that can come from social media. And I think we hyper focus, like we hyper focus on the church's negatives. We hyper focus on the negatives of social media sometimes. It can be a force for good. Unfortunately, it's ruled by evil people, and it's inhabited by a lot of evil people. But I think we can take our own little small part of YouTube, of Twitter. I won't say Facebook because I absolutely advocate for everybody to just leave Facebook now, and not give Lizard Man any more money. Um,
I saw a funny story where it said that um, the guy who owns Facebook, Zuckerberg, he apparently had people looking for, like, he had his engineers programmed to find and track people who actually made memes of him as a lizard and as an alien. And I can't help but laugh at that. That's so ridiculous.
I don't doubt it. I mean, you know my personal opinions of big tech. I think it should all be broken up. I think it should be. I think it should be regulated as a utility. Like anything else that is as big as it is. I mean, we didn't wait for Ma Bell or AT&T to get as big as these guys are. We didn't wait for Standard Oil or U.S. Steel to get as big as these guys are. Before
That's
we went.
because libertarianism hadn't infected all aspects of our political culture.
Yeah, I mean, Heritage Foundation is now saying, breaking them up is bad, and Turning Point is. It's just all so just like tiresome and boring.
I don't think people should call Turning Point USA Turning Point USA. I think they should refer to them as Turning Point Establishment or Turning Point Oligarchy,
Oh
because
yeah,
that's.
absolutely.
I follow Charlie Kirk on Twitter, but not because I like him.
I follow Charlie Kirk only because I can't believe how weird shaped his head is.
Well,
Sorry, folks. As I said, I am sometimes a little judgmental.
we've all got our foibles. So I think I'm going to wrap this up because I do have to go to my
Yep.
part-time my sort of part-time job that I use to supplement my income in addition to what I do here. But I do want to thank you for coming on. I did put on the community section of my channel a link to your channel. If not, where can they find you?
Twitter at TradPatrick. At YouTube, Tradcast Show. Right now, that's about it. I will be writing again for a few publications. I'll be announcing that on the channel and on Twitter.
And if you want to, you can submit something to my blog. I get a few hundred hits a day because I put my sources up there.
Yep, I fully plan to. I just started getting back into it just recently, and a couple other places will be coming soon. So I'll announce them via you and some other people that we know in the circles. But some big stuff on the horizon.
Very good. Glad to hear it, and I'll have you on again if you're up for it in the future.
Sure, anytime.
Perfect. Well, anyway, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll be back in the future. So anyway, have a good weekend, everyone.